Sarah Davey.
And I'm James Routledge.
And this is Books Unpacked.
Join us as we chat to people from across the publishing industry to unpack the life cycle of a book.
Pop the kettle on, get comfy, and we'll get started.
Morning, Jake. Nice to see you. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
It's lovely to see you in person. It's one of those things, again, this happens all the time, where I follow people online and I kind of know what they look like and I feel like I know them, but I've never met you before. So do you want to just say for the other people who've never met us before, who you are and what you do briefly?
Yeah, sure, thank you. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I'm probably a bit more stubbly and dishevelled today. So I'm a writer, poet, academic, and I've been writing kind of professionally for probably about 15 years now, various freelance projects spinning around with academia and kind of other jobs. Started as a poet and kind of known really as a poet. But I'm moving into nonfiction and have a book of nonfiction coming out imminently.
Woo, exciting.
Yeah, so actually, Jake, the first time we've met like face to face in real life was actually for a kind of proof tour of the new book, which was great. It was kind of a bit of our own little kind of bookshop pilgrimage, kind of working through Hexham, right through to Newcastle, then down to Durham as well.
Looked like so much fun.
It was great fun. And actually, it was kind of, in a way, sort of following in the footsteps of the book in a small way. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about the book, about those footsteps and what that kind of pilgrimage was all about?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, that was really good fun day out, like a kind of grand tour of the Northeast, wasn't it? I mean, the book, as you say, it's a pilgrimage. So it's got a sort of traditional kind of A to B narrative at its heart. So I start in Lindisfarne, Holy Island, and it kind of tacks a sort of north to south route. So the reader ends up at Durham Cathedral. Like many pilgrimage narratives, it sort of traditionally kind of ends up in a big church. And it has, I guess, religion and questions of kind of faith and spirituality at its heart. But it's also a book that is interested, I guess, in kind of other cultural strands and other historic strands and other questions, I think, that the Northeast has been grappling with for centuries, really. So along with the faith and the religion, you've got the strong working class identity of the region. So as a sort of talisman, I carry on this journey my great-grandfather's Davy lamp. So, richly symbolic image of the working class kind of pedigree of this region, built really on coal and on shipbuilding and on other kind of heavy industries. So those are the kind of two core things at the book, but it's also interested in, I guess, who the other sort of makers are and the other shapers in the region. So the poets, the visual artists, the photographers, the musicians, and also sort of just the normal everyday people who are kind of either come across by happenstance or who I'm kind of reflecting on. So it's a bit of a sort of a mixed melting pot, really, of all these figures who've been influential to me as an individual and as an artist, but more importantly, I think, have been kind of the people who have sort of driven this collective sense of what the Northeast was, what the Northeast is, and what it might, go on to become.
Yeah.
I love the cover, and this is what you'll see is James is quite put together, and I just go off on tangents. My surname's Davy, spelled like the Davy lamp, and when my maiden name was Plant, and I had to spell it all the time. I was like, I'm definitely going to change my name to Davy. I'll never have to spell that. I have to spell it constantly. And if I say like the Davy lamp, most people look at us blankly and are like, what are you talking about? So when I saw the Davy lamp on the front of your book and you mentioned it, I was like, someone who knows, we should know we're Northern. We should know what a Davy lamp is. We are mining. I'm from Penshire. It's mining, it's embedded in our DNA when I say it and somebody doesn't know what a Davy lamp is. I used to get annoyed, but now I'm like, I want to tell you what a Davy lamp is. I want you to know what it is. No, it's nothing to do with me and my name, but it's all these little things that are like that language that we have between ourselves, and you don't realise. You think, I know what that is, and people don't. And you want people to know, and that's what hopefully this will do. I get excited about Davy lamps.
No, same. I mean, I feel like one of the things that I'm trying to do in the book, Sarah, is this idea of and I don't think it's necessarily it's probably not the most kind of grabby title, but I was thinking of it in terms of the millennial North, right? So like being born at the end of the 80s, I was like what 5 when the last mine closed in South Shield. So that's the age my son is now, right? And if I think about my son kind of losing that history at such a young age, then it makes total sense that people who are kind of late millennials or whatever would maybe not know this stuff, and like they might have like a hint of it through things like names and kind of pictures, or certainly in my case I guess the original thing was grandparents, right? So I'd been a kid kind of in my nana's front room, at that sort of age, 5, 6, 7, and she has all these wonderful things on the mantelpiece, the Davy lamp, the little brass ornament of the miner like shoveling his coal. And it's a sort of already a redundant thing in the mid 90s, but as you grow and you kind of get to have a bigger sense of the histories you've come out of, um, I think you inevitably begin to kind of scratch that curiosity and go, oh, what is this? Like, what did this mean? So for me, it's like acknowledging that, hey, I'm not a miner, right? Like, I'm a soft skills writer. I can't pretend that. And I think the book and Johnny's design on the cover, Jonathan Pelham, who's done the wonderful cover image, I think he's captured so perfectly the fact that it is now a symbol, right? And it's this totem thing. It's this kind of like lodestar image that kind of can stand in for so much else, right? If we put a like actual photograph of a miner's lamp on the front of the book, that just wouldn't have worked because it's not a history of coal mining. So yeah, I know what you mean. Like, and carrying that as a name, wow, like that's such a rich thing. And I can understand where that frustration might come from.
Yeah. It's no, I was going to start going on about how we've had links with the name, but that's not what we hate to talk about. So
So, Jake, just to go back to our little tour through bookshops, I mean, since then, I've been dipping into the book, but actually, what I didn't want to do is just blast through it cover to cover. So,
Yeah.
I've been sort of dipping in and kind of doing chapter by chapter. And what I really loved is actually obviously, you've got these little touchstones of this kind of northern iconography almost, but like this northern legacy as you're kind of doing this journey. But also, what I really loved is it's almost like a buddy road trip book in a way.
Yeah.
What I've really enjoyed is kind of all the interactions you have and actually all of the people that you meet or bring on the journey with you. Can you tell us about some of those people and how they kind of connect to well, to your story, but also to the book?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. I mean, I was influenced early doors by people like Ian Sinclair, right? So, like, if you think about books like Edge of the Horizon by Ian Sinclair, where he's kind of like marshalling this like troop of people to kind of follow in the footsteps of John Clare, or the journey that John Clare took out of the asylum. So there was like a literary kind of background, knowing that other writers had done this sort of stuff. Um, but I think what it is like I'm somebody who, when I research, I sort of need like I need to do my own research and kind of go into archives or like go down kind of internet wormholes and just kind of read the literature. But I also need other people to like add to that and give me like extra context and sort of, add depth to it, I suppose. So once I'd figured out the route and I knew which way I was going to be traveling, I knew that there was going to be key areas where I would sort of want to be chaperoned or like guided through certain sections. So, for example, in Beadnell, um, I had never been to Beadnell before, but I knew about Beadnell because of the work of the poet Katrina Porteous. And I'd like read Katrina's work for years. I'm a massive fan. So I was like, hey, like, and I'd interviewed her for a project like many years ago. I was like, okay, I'm gonna get back in touch and be like, do you mind like showing me around? And that's kind of how it happened. So like she's like, yeah, sure, let's meet up. So we sorted a date. She met us down by the old lime kilns there, and she like brought all these wonderful objects. So like in that chapter, for example, she's got the netting needles, she's got these fishing hooks, she's got all these like kind of industrial artifacts connected to the fishing communities in North Northumberland. And it just added such texture to have these people who had these items and had these stories and had this deep connection to like a very particular part of the coast or a very particular town or village. And it was a model that once I'd sort of established it with Katrina and with Catherine Renton and kind of a few other people like start of the book in part one, I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to find out who else can maybe meet me at other points. So for example, I'm actually wearing the guy's t-shirt. This is a t-shirt of Hector Gannett, aka Aaron Duff. So I'd happened to be at one of his gigs at the Sage, or the Glass House, as we're now going to call it. And you know, like an amazing night, really loved the music and stuff. But I was like, oh my God, this is another person who has a really profound connection to a particular part of the region. Um, like I loved his music, loved his lyrics. So I got in touch with him. I was like, hiya, like this is a bit weird. I've just seen your gig. Do you fancy showing us around North Shields? And he's like, I. Like, so, you know, like people generally when they
He said,
get
"Can he?"
asked, they said, can he? And people are like, yeah, like, lush, yeah, of course I will. And it was meant like we just sort of walked around for a long morning. We're only together like 4 hours or something, but the extra information that Aaron brought to that section from sort of Tynemouth through North Shields, like it just added so much to it. And I think the buddy thing is a good description because a pilgrimage, right, it can be quite a solitary thing, right? It can be, and we often think of pilgrimages as these kind of introspective journeys, and they are, of course, introspective journeys, and they're about sort of self-discovery, and that's all in the book too. And I'm very much kind of using the narrative and the route to figure out a lot of stuff and unpack, I guess, a lot of anxieties and uncertainties. But by kind of rubbing off and bouncing off other people, like it becomes more than the sum of its parts. And I think you begin to like get at that sense that I've always had in the Northeast, that like people like to share their patch and they like to share their stories. So yeah, that was kind of like something that sort of like partially deliberately and then partially kind of out of like just happenstance and serendipity was the nice way of framing the book. Yeah.
Mhm.
And it takes people on that journey. Starting at Lindisfarne's really interesting because we hadn't been to Lindisfarne for years. And then I started reading Cuddy by Ben Myers.
Mm.
And I read that he'd written a bit of it up there. And I was like, oh, should we see if we can stay overnight? Oh my God. I don't think I would have gone and done it if I hadn't have thought, because I write as well. I don't know, there was just something about that
Mhm.
feeling of being there, being cut off, and seeing how it might have felt. And then I read the opening chapters of the book like it was a windstorm, and and it was absolutely magic. But
Mhm.
passing that on to each other, like it isn't just this individual thing, and that's that sense of northernness, isn't it? Is we do things together, and if we don't do them together, we always tell each other what we've done, and if we've done something and we love it, we want other people to love it. And I think that's a really northern thing,
Yeah.
especially north. When I'm talking about the north, because people listen from all over, I'm very much talking about the northeast. Like
Mhm.
I'm very like the northeast is us, we're the north. But it's that feeling, isn't it, of wanting to share and wanting to be part of something and pass it on to other people.
It's a kinship thing, isn't it? It's a
Mm.
kinship thing, it's an advocacy thing. And my feeling is that it must be a positive legacy of that sort of harsh, you know, working class kind of everyone has to meld together, everyone has to band together and help each other through sort of tough times. I still very much feel that that kind of egalitarian spirit is still in the Northeast, and I wanted to tap into that in the book by meeting these people and kind of exploring their stories and sort of bringing them together into this sort of, yeah, this thing that was more than the sum of its parts, and that was kind of speaking to this sort of sense of a bigger collective, maybe. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. And I guess as part of that like larger collective, that idea of kind of northern publishing and kind of northern presses is I guess part of the what we class as that like northern publishing landscape, not just the writers, not just the creatives, but it's the presses themselves. And I guess within
Yeah.
the last few years, there's been such a well, seemingly a bit of a rise in northern publishing and also getting publishing outside of London.
Yeah.
I mean, what's your experience been with Manchester University Press? I mean, how did they pick up the book and how did you approach them in the first place?
Okay, great. Yeah. So I went back through emails to work out the trail on this because I knew it was slightly kind of not convoluted, but I knew it wasn't linear, right? So what first happened was in I'm gonna check my dates. In August of 2021, I contacted MUP for the first time, and I contacted Lucy Burns, who's an amazing writer, and Lucy is now a colleague at Liverpool John Moores. And I think this also sort of speaks to the overlap that you often see between academia and publishing, or like publishing and the art sector. There's kind of, you know, those kind of touchstones meeting up with each other. So I'd sort of sent a version of this book to Lucy. in August 2021. And she and Tom Dark, who was sort of at the press then, sort of in his original run, like quite liked it. And they were like, yeah, I can kind of see where it's going, but like it's a little bit on the obscure side, and we're going to struggle to like sell it, to be really honest. So like really sorry, but come back with something like a bit more kind of general readership. So I was like, okay, fine. And then it kind of like then went on that long winding journey that, I think is probably typical for most books, in that I was kind of knocking on agents' doors, tried about a dozen agents, had a sort of really serious conversation with one agent, but then we sort of reached a sticking point where we agreed to disagree, and it kind of didn't, the story didn't continue there. And then I was kind of at that stage of like, oh, like, can I really do this? Like, am I actually going to be able to like put the heart into this book and to get it to being accepted as a project? And I really didn't know whether it was going to happen. But then I read a newsletter from New Writing North, and I distinctly remember reading this, where they'd done a spotlight on Manchester University Press. And it was in that time, it was probably like the summer of the year after, so 2022. And they'd basically used it as an opportunity to introduce Kim Walker, who was kind of redeveloping the trade list after Tom had left. And I was like, oh, this sounds quite exciting. And like the books that were coming out in the next kind of catalogue year were looking really sharp and kind of interesting. So I was like, right, I'm going to send this back to MUP. I'm going to sort of address it straight to Kim and see what happens. And I remember sending that, and I kind of made a log of when I did it. So on the 12th of December 2022, I emailed Kim and I was like, look, I've kind of already been in touch with you or your previous colleagues, but I know you've kind of got this new remit for the trade list. What do you think? And Kim wrote back the same day and said, this sounds interesting. Have you got a proposal? Have you got a sample chapter? Have you got more stuff? And I was like, yes, I have. And so I sent it straight back to Kim. Because I'd had like a year to like develop a really solid proposal and like really get it into the right kind of shape to approach editors. And it went to Kim, and in the January of 2023, we started working together. The book was formally accepted, and that's when it all kind of began. Yeah.
And just because writing brain coming in, were you just pitching a proposal with it being nonfiction, or had you written it? What kind of shape was it in when you were pitching it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was pitching a proposal, and so thinking about the sort of classic things like market analysis, a blurb, a longer synopsis, a sort of competing titles, readership analysis, like who would buy this thing, what did the demographic look like? All of that was kind of in a document of about, I think it was probably about 10 or 12 pages, something like that. And then I also had the foreword written, and I had kind of a rough version of chapter 9, because I'd sort of done chapter 9 already, like as a radio broadcast thing. So it was sort of like already existed, or like a version of it already existed. So yeah, so I basically sent like only a small amount of sample material, because nonfiction, right? It's like it's sold on proposal much more
Yeah.
than fiction, right? So actual writing, there wasn't a huge amount there, but I had, as I say, I'd like really thought quite hard about like how to shape the book. So one thing I also did, just to add in, probably it must have been the time between MUP, like first declining the manuscript and then accepting it kind of 14 or 15 months later, is I had a consultation session with a freelance editor, like a book coach person. And she like looked through this proposal document that I had and kind of suggested things that I might want to do to strengthen it, and like how to make it like really sing and kind of like look the part, I guess. And she also suggested other agents and other presses, and some of those agents I went to with it, including that person who I was kind of looking to be represented by, but then decided not to be. So it was this sort of long-winded process of kind of like getting a bit of feedback, chipping away at it again, sending it out again, coming back. And it took a long time, right? It did take a long time, but eventually it landed with Kim, and yeah, like it's weird. It kind of did this massive like loop back to MUP.
Which is really nice. And it is that thing, this is what I talk about a lot, is a lot of people, especially when I mentor people, that don't realise that non-fiction, you don't have to have written the whole thing,
Yeah.
which is really kind of a unique position.
Yeah.
But it's actually, I find it's Harper North have got a really good document on their website just for anyone who's thinking about pitching non-fiction, which is what they want from a pitch. And it's an absolutely brilliant way of outlining if you've actually got an idea. Because you need to know, like you say, it's not just, oh, I want to write about miners lamps. You need to know like who it's for, what it's going to be about, where it's going to go, have a feel of what each chapter is going to be. It's quite a sort of methodical research-based thing. And I suppose, does that feed into what you do as an academic, maybe, that kind of research side of it?
Yeah, sort of. It sort of does actually, yeah. I mean, there is that sense of like if you develop, say, a research proposal, you have to be thinking about abstracts, right? I mean, we can think of the like academic abstract as effectively a book blurb, right? It's the thing that kind of first sells in like 200 words to the casual browser. So there are similarities. Obviously, like the audiences do overlap, and they definitely do, but the academic stuff we tend to think of, I guess, as more specialist and more kind of probably more narrow in terms of audience. So funnily enough, what happened really, like even before I was first approaching MUP, is I'd started doing some radio work, and I had to pitch like radio programs, and that's a completely different thing because they're asking you to like not just have a 200-word blurb or abstract, they're like asking you for like 20 words on why this thing should have a 10-minute slot on radio. And like, oh my God, like that was a steep learning curve, but I managed to distill down a really, really early version of this, the chapter 9, which is me carrying the ashes of the poet Bill Martin to Durham Cathedral. And that's kind of like, in a sense, that's kind of like the heart of the book, carrying the old to the new, right? Like that's kind of that in very, very small form. So I'd sort of learned some of those skills, and I think Sarah, probably what you're getting at is like there's an art to this. There's a real kind of craft and an artistry to getting that thing distilled down so that an editor who's absolutely swamped or like a radio producer who's absolutely swamped can kind of cut the wheat from the chaff and go, yeah, that's the one I want.
Yeah, I just think it's really interesting. Obviously everyone's experiences are slightly different, but even just out of the people we've spoken to, whether you're a fiction writer, putting out a debut novel, or whether you're somebody who's had a bit more experience through academia working with a poetry press. I mean, everyone we've spoken to actually has very different experiences. But at the heart of it, I guess it's all about finding the right home and finding kind of the right place for it, and actually knowing a little bit about the publishers before you approach them
Yeah.
goes such a long way. And I guess in for most people in retrospect that's probably common sense. But I mean, was there ever a time where you kind of saw this particular project, this particular book, maybe having a different home or being somewhere else, or kind of pitched in a slightly different way?
Yeah, do you mean in terms of presses and
In terms
publishers?
of presses, in terms of maybe where you saw it on a bookshelf in your mind?
Yeah. So to begin with, to begin with, I saw it as one of those academic slash trade crossover titles.
Yeah.
Like, I'm struggling to think of an example, but like a lot of the like say a lot of the Yale University Press books are quite like that. And I think actually a lot of MUPs are like that too. Maybe kind of even some of like the Hearst books, like Dan Jackson's The Northumbrians, to an extent, is kind of in that crossover realm, right? So initially I sort of thought, okay, like it can be kind of partially academic monograph, like underpinned by all of my scholarly research, and it can maybe like sit on a university press like literature list or a poetry list or a kind of some kind of cultural criticism list or something like that. But then the more I started to work on the radio and sort of had to do this really kind of snappy pitching thing, um, the more I realized that actually there was like a bigger audience out there for this kind of material. And that partially came from feedback. Like people would write to me and say like, oh, I heard your thing on the radio where you and it actually, funnily enough, the poem at the back of the book, the Davy poem, like the whole kind of like catalyst in some ways for this nonfiction book. Like I'd been reading that out, and people would be like, oh my God, like I need to tell you about my mum's Davy lamp, and I need to tell you about the time when me uncle nearly died, and like and all these kind of like awful, tragic, but kind of quite humorous and like just stories that were full of life and vitality. People would chime in with that. So I realized there was a bigger sort of appetite out there. And I was approached really early on in this process, out of the blue, by Harper North, and I had a conversation with Harper North. I pitched a quite embryonic version of this, I think it's fair to say, to Harper North, and it was rejected. Then I kind of worked up a newer version, which was looking like, I would say, like a maybe an infant's version of the book we now have, if that makes sense. And that went back to Harper, and then nothing happened. And I was like, right, okay. So, like, and I've kind of not got any bad feelings about that because I know that people are just super busy and the industry is the industry. So I was like, okay, but that gave me the kind of confidence and the buoyancy to go, right, okay, there's something here. There's definitely something here. So I was starting to look at those other lists and like thinking about like, okay, could it go to um could it go to Canongate, or could it go to Faber, or could it go to Granta? And then I was like, no, it's not a Granta book. It's not a Granta book, but it might be a Faber book because I was like reading people like Michael Pedersen, and I was reading like Andrew Macmillan with his novel on Canongate. I was like, oh yeah, maybe it's a bit like Andrew Macmillan, maybe it's a bit like Michael Pedersen. But then I was like, maybe, maybe not. And then like I tried to get it in through I can't remember Carol, is it Carol Clark who's got Portobello Literary?
Carol, yeah.
Yeah, like so I sent it to her, and like I got a really nice kind of rejection and stuff like that. And then I was like, oh, like because I've got a kind of in with a Scottish press already, very, very small press, but a wonderful press, Blue Diode, who published my poetry. I was like, oh, maybe I can sell my nonfiction straight into Scotland and then kind of work south. But that didn't happen. So I think as an author, like, and as a person who's pitching this stuff, you're kind of trying different things, and you're like, right, I'll throw that over there, see what sticks. I'll throw that over there, does that stick? And it, there's a method to it, but there is also sort of an element of just like, yeah, kind of like feeling like shit. I realized I was doing that too wildly at one point, and I needed to be more strategic, and I needed to really think about like where would the best place for this to be to land. And so when it kind of went back to MUP and Kim accepted it, I was like, this is great. This is really good because she has such a good vision for the list. And really straight away, like on that first Zoom call with Kim, she was straight in on like where it would be sold. Like, she loved the fact that I'd analyzed the readership. So I'd done this thing of like, said like, there's the kind of middle class audience in somewhere like Jesmond, or in like, I don't know, like in York or somewhere like that, kind of like they've got a bit of disposable income, they'll buy this readily. But there's also like the guy in concert who's maybe in his late 40s and maybe reads a few crime fiction novels a year, but he's kind of got that sense of being, like from the Northeast, and like he's like, oh, I'm really proud of me heritage. So I was kind of had these two people in mind, like the kind of the and it's gendered is probably, I probably shouldn't necessarily say it's the gendered in that way as towards a man, because it equally could, of course, be a woman who feels like that. But that sense of someone who's maybe more working class and who doesn't kind of read and collect books in the way that I kind of as a middle class person do. So I was thinking about that in that way. And I think when Kim saw that I was thinking like that, it chimed with what she was thinking as well. That's a very long answer, sorry.
No, but
No,
it
it's
is.
good. It's good to know
Yeah.
like that you've had these sort of different ambitions for the project as well,
Yeah.
because like going in fresh is so difficult, and not knowing who's likely to pick up a book
Yeah.
is going in so blind, isn't it? I
And it's
guess.
also that thing of, as a writer, the first thing that people tend to say, agents and publishers, is where would your books sit on a shelf? Which
Yeah.
is great, but you absolutely know that in 2 years' time those books won't be there. It's like, where would
Yeah.
your books sit? And I think, well, it would sit next to these ones, but they're published now, so
Yeah.
who knows what's going to be published in 2 years? You're taking such a risk, but you do have to do that, and we've gone over this with multiple writers, especially Jenny, who wrote The List of Suspicious Things, is having two heads as a writer. Some people just write and want to send their work out and have it published, but you kind of need to have two jobs, the lovely writing bit and then the I want to sell my work bit. And if you do
Oh,
want to sell your work, the more you can put in and the more research you do, the
yeah.
better it's going to go, really.
I spent a lot of time getting in touch with really trusted friends who were in the industry in one way or another. So, for example, wonderful novelist and poet Francesca Haig, who's back in Australia now, where she's from, but she taught me as an undergrad at Chester when I was sort of in the early 20s. And I've not seen Francesca like in person for like a decade or more. But I sent her an email and I was like, look, I'm working on this thing. I haven't got an agent, so I'm kind of struggling for guidance. Could you give me any tips? And Francesca was amazing because she's like, well, I could kind of just say, hey, you could speak to my agent, but she was like, I don't think that's going to be what you need. I think what you need is to really think about the core of the book and kind of like, yeah, these kind of questions of like, who is it really for and what is it really about? And then she did kind of then suggest a few agents, but they were mainly in Australia, right? So like it didn't kind of feel relevant to go down that route. But I had conversations like that with a number of authors who I really like and admire, maybe three or four of them. And that kind of almost that kind of informal mentoring thing was what led to the book being the thing that I was able to then kind of like go, like literally I would be that guy who at midnight would be like downloading each catalogue from each press that I thought would the book could belong to. So I'd be like, oh, what if Canongate got out next year? Oh yeah, and I kind of looking through like all of these like imprints of these bigger presses and going like, oh, could it go there? And then finding out who the agent was who'd represented that title that they were going to publish. But you can, I think, also go too far down that route and you can kind of get
Yeah.
just stuck in this like, oh, just this hypothetical world. So I had to pull back and go, no, I'm actually going to kind of keep writing a bit of it. I'm going to keep sending it out, but strategically. And if it doesn't stick, then hey, I'll take stock and I'll kind of put it on the back burner. And luckily, MUP accepted it. So
Yeah. I mean, we've spoken before, Jake, about your experience kind of finding audiences as a poet. I mean, how's your experience been, how has it differed from kind of publishing poetry to this kind of new venture? And is it a different way of thinking, or have you still got those things in mind when you're approaching a press for poetry?
there's a lot of overlap. Yeah, there's a lot of overlap. So the poetry book, I'd sent it to I think I'd only actually sent it to two other publishers before it got with Blue Diode. So I'd sent it to Blood Axe because like every poet in the UK will always send the manuscript to Blood Axe,
Mhm.
especially if they're from the Northeast and especially if they're writing about the Northeast, as I am. And Neil sent a lovely, like I had a lovely rejection from Neil, and this was in like God, like 2019, something like that. And he was like, look, I just can't do it. Like I'm strained. The list is kind of already quite full. It's awful taking on new authors. You can only take on like two, maybe three new authors a year, sort of thing. So he's like, look, why don't you send it to Nine Arches Press? So he already publishes Jane Comin, who's the publisher at Nine Arches. And I was already a fan of Jane's work. Like I had sort of several collections and anthologies that she'd done. So it went off to Jane, and she was like kind of like on the cusp of wanting to publish it and really liked it, but it just sort of fell at the last hurdle. And again, I was like, look, no hard feelings. Like, I understand. I understand that, like, you don't have a massive budget. You can't be publishing dozens of new authors a year. So it was a similar process. And then when I heard about Rob setting up Blue Diode, the way that that happened is that he was sending proofs to Newcastle. So at the time I was working at Newcastle Uni and I was kind of helping to program the Newcastle Poetry Festival and sort of doing like some of the NCLA events and like we've talked about this, James, kind of like serving the nice kind of tepid white wine to the people who come in to the black box theatre for their reading. I was that person kind of doing the admin. And the Blue Diode proofs arrived and I think it was probably Rob's like third and fourth collection. So it was like quite early on in his journey as a publisher. He'd sent them to NCLA. And I just like had a look through and I was like, oh, right, these are like really nicely produced, right? He's really thought carefully about the typesetting. He's designed them really beautifully. He's sort of like got really good endorsements. And I knew Rob was somebody who was very plugged in to the poetry community across, particularly across Scotland, but like nationally as well, right? And so I was like, okay, it's not going to go with Blood Axe, it's not going to go with Nine Archers. Um, like that Geordie thing, shy Bane's getting out. Honestly, I was brought up on that mantra, shy Bane's getting out. If you don't ask, you don't get. So I sent it off to Rob, and Rob liked it and was like, yeah, let's go, let's do it. And the process of working with Rob was much more low key because obviously it's him. He doesn't have a marketing team. He doesn't have kind of like a publicist. He is just it. He is Blue Diode Press. So everything went through him directly, and it was lovely. And I got to kind of meet some really interesting people. We did like a mini tour for the book and kind of went to Edinburgh, went to Manchester, met all these sort of Czech poets he's publishing. And yeah, it was great. For a poetry collection, like it did really well. I think it did really, really well, and I'm super proud of it. But as soon as I started thinking about this new book, I had some of the same sort of approaches, and I never really changed like who I was. I was always very upfront about what I wanted to do and what the style of the work was and what I was about as an author. But I realized that in the non-fiction world, I was going to have to deal with like teams of people, and that I would have to kind of do a bit of jostling and a bit of jockeying, more so than I already had, because poetry is a hustle, right? Everybody sort of knows this, but I also sort of think the world of non-fiction publishing is a bit of a hustle too, and you don't want to kind of like burn any bridges or spite anybody, but as an unrepresented author, like I haven't got an agent doing any of this for me. Like I had to be quite pushy in some of my like, have you read it yet? Like, could you please reply? Like that kind of stuff, you know? So yeah, but I think that also comes out of being from the Northeast and sort of being a bit like, yeah, I'm gonna pester you. I
It's
am.
the only way. I mean, just because I work for the book festival, I work mainly with publicists, and unless you go, please just respond,
Yeah.
please, God, just reply to my email. I've even started doing that thing, which is the horror of ringing people, and there's nothing I hate more than ringing someone, but my it works. It works an absolute treat. If you ring someone, if someone rings me, I'm like, no, I'm not answering that. But I've this last week, I've been forced. My hand has been forced, and you know what? Even if you get the answer you don't want, at least you get an answer. And I think for me, like right now, I've just had a rejection that really stung. It
Right. Okay.
stung so bad, but I'm totally fine with it. It's part of the process.
Yeah.
But at least you want to know, don't you? And if you can
You
build those
do.
relationships, you're like, that's fine. You can
Yeah.
come back to them later on.
Yeah,
It
it's strange industry though, isn't it? Like,
mm.
do you build up these sort of calluses against rejection, or no? Because I mean,
Never.
I'm not a writer, Jake. I mean, we've talked about this briefly, but like that idea of rejection is partly the reason why most people won't write. And I
Yeah.
think, as a poet, I don't know whether, I mean, you say it obviously, it's a bit more of a hustle. You really kind of have to put yourself out there.
It's probably the worst paying part of publishing poetry as well. I don't think I'm wrong in saying that. And I write short stories. So
Yeah.
I think poetry is probably one of you're not going to be making big
I
bucks if you
mean,
get a poetry collection published.
yeah, I mean, there was no advance for the
Yeah.
poetry book, but it sort of didn't matter because I was in a different position. Like I'd already written it. I think that's the
Yeah.
key thing. Like it was already stacked up, ready to go. I just had to send it. We tweaked it. Like we did take a few things out of the manuscript and we like line edited a little bit and we kind of worked on it over email for a few months. But really it was ready, right? It was ready to roll. This book, Between the Salt and the Ash, like I say, I had probably like, I don't know, like 10 or 12,000 words written. Um, like probably what survives in the finished published book is probably 6,000 words of that original 12,000. So the other sort of like 72,000 is completely new and fresh, right? So yeah, I think if I hadn't done the poetry book and sort of grown that quite thick skin
Mhm.
and also had like years of like smaller rejections behind, so like just magazine rejections, journal rejections, um general kind of like ambivalence and antipathy. I don't think I would have had enough of a thick skin to have carried on with the non-fiction thing. So I'm glad that I had that
Yeah.
experience first. Yeah.
it builds up slowly, doesn't it? Because people say quite often, again, the mentoring, how do I build it up? And I remember when I first started sending work out, I was so annoyed when I got rejected. I was like, what do you mean? I've written it. And now I'm just like, okie dokie, next. What's next? And I
Yeah.
don't know how I got to that state. It's still not very good and it's frustrating, but it's like, I don't know how it works, but I think it's like you say, you've just got to keep doing it. And eventually
Hmm.
you
Mm.
understand the industry, you understand that it's not necessarily you, and
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
it's a really difficult thing when people say, how do you get over it? It's that you never get over it, but it's part of the work to, put yourself out there. You might get a no, but somebody somewhere might eventually,
Mm.
but it's not that it gets easier, it's different. I don't know, I think that's how I think it. It's not easy. It's not nice to be rejected, but you accept that it's part of the process and you've just got to keep going if you want to do it. I
Sure.
don't know if that's how you see it or not, or
Yeah, I think it comes back to those two heads, doesn't it, Sarah? So it's the business head and the sort of
mm.
like having a sense of the market and a sense of trends and a sense of who's looking to commission in which areas. And then it's the more sort of intrinsic artistic value side and the kind of you would do this stuff regardless. You would be a writer regardless. You'd still be writing your stuff. Even if even if only kind of very, very few people ever read it. I mean, that's how I feel. I'd still be writing me poems. I'm still going to be a poet. I'm still going to write work. If it gets bought by a huge publisher and I'm happy with that arrangement, then great. But if it's another indie press and that's the thing that's going to get it out there in the best way, then great, I'll go that way too. Um, I've become quite sort of savvy to that and quite objective about it. But you're right. I mean, I'm in me 30s now, and it's taken a good 10 or 15 years to get that sort of like approach kind of built up. I couldn't have done this in the early 20s. I would have just crumpled.
Yeah, yeah, I'm the same. Like I started sending work out like my mid 30s. I'm 42 now, and
Mhm.
I occasionally have a little cry, but I would have had a much bigger cry when I was 25. No chance.
Sure.
But I guess, I mean, we kind of come full circle back to like finding your tribe, right? And like finding the people whether it's mentorship and having that kind of support in the
Yeah.
background and kind of building it up, or whether it's finding a really good editor and you can kind of work, in a collaboration that way, or also just finding your readers and finding the kind of people you can lean on. I mean, obviously, Jake, the book's not quite out yet, but obviously the proofs are being sent out, people have been reading it, you're getting reviews already. I mean, how does that feel now that you're on kind of almost the other side of things? It's almost real. It's
Yeah.
out into the world. You're getting feedback. I mean, do you feel relief? Do you feel excitement? I mean, what are the emotions going through at the minute?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mix, James, like it's relief, definitely. Like I remember when I first handed it in as like the first manuscript went to Kim last May, and that was like I can breathe a bit now. And then I got all these amazing kind of very detailed line level edits from Alan at MUP, and then had that whole crisis of like, oh, this is awful. This is just the worst writing ever. But again, you kind of suspend that irrational side and go, no, he's not saying you're a shit writer. He's just saying like, let's fix your little inconsistencies and make this a
Yeah.
stronger book, right? Um, but yeah, to get to the point of it being about to be released, it's hugely exciting. I mean, like I sat looking through this timeline last night and kind of looking into where I'd sent it and when, and kind of the whole genesis of the book. And to have gone from sort of him accepting it just over 2 years ago to it being on the cusp of being published is incredible. Like, I am massively giving myself a pat on the back and sort of saying, well done you, you've achieved a good thing here. Um, those endorsements that have come in are like incredibly uplifting. The sort of trio of endorsements that we're going to have on the jacket are incredible. Like for people like David Armand to be saying like that this is a really important book that should be read everywhere. Like honestly can't think of a higher accolade. Like someone who I've got so much respect and time for to kind of have read it and given it that consideration
Mhm.
is great. And then like little reviews that are starting to come in. So Northeast Byline Times have just read it and reviewed it. And it's interesting, isn't it? Like each reviewer and each person who comments on a book will find their own like thing to say about it. And um they'd picked up on stuff that I was kind of aware of, but like didn't think was necessarily like integral to the book. Um, and like it had a feature in Living North, actually in the current issue. So like when I was interviewed by the journalist there, like her view on it was all kind of quite different as well, kind of coming more of a journalism kind of angle. So yeah, I think each person that like each sort of set of hands that a book goes through kind of leave a different set of fingerprints on it, and you end up with something that like begins to become out of your control. And that's
Mhm.
quite an interesting place, like as a writer who has had such control for like 2 or really more like 3 or 4 years, I guess, from the very kind of like nib of the idea to like now, you begin to realize that this thing is more in the public domain, and it's more kind of a product that exists in a bigger realm, and it's, yeah, you still have control over it and it's still your baby, but people will run with it in a different way to perhaps how you ever expected. And at the minute, that's all kind of positive stuff. I know that at some point someone is going to say something that I'm going to not like, and I'm going to probably want to have a little cry about that. But that's fine. I feel like I've got a fairly, I've got a fairly kind of resilient attitude to that. And if people criticize it, then that's fair. Like, you publish a book, it's open to criticism, it's open to disagreement, and that's kind of how it should be in a healthy culture, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But also, I mean, you're very close to it being on bookshelves in real bookshops, getting picked up by people from our neck of the woods, and the kind of the people who are probably going to have the strongest
Yeah,
emotional responses to this
Yeah.
book. I
yeah,
mean, I think talking to kind of Manchester University Press and the team there, and kind of looking at how they're pitching the book to bookshops, and kind of seeing how they're planning their marketing, and kind of all the events that you've got coming up as well. Do you feel like all of the effort is being put into the Northeast? Did you feel like there is a fair distribution of effort going around the UK?
um we're being very strategic about this. So and MUP, as you've said, James, are really savvy and really on the ball. So what we're doing is the initial run of marketing and publicity is targeting independent booksellers in the Northeast. Then we're going to kind of open up more widely to, the Waterstones, the Blackwells, sort of general Northeast booksellers. And I think that that is the right approach, because at its heart, this book is it is fundamentally about the northeast of England, and about how beautiful and strange and beguiling and often irritating and vexing the northeast of England is. But it's where I'm from, it's my home, and I am the most proud person to ever come from the northeast, apart from maybe Sting. And I'm being a bit facetious, but genuinely so proud to have been able to have drawn on being from the region, and to kind of bring this story back to the Northeast, because I don't actually live in the Northeast now. So we moved like to Shropshire last summer, and so going back to the Northeast now is kind of this slightly strange thing, because I'm going to visit parents and grandparents and brothers and sisters and so on. But they're kind of more fleeting visits now. Like, I kind of parachute in and then I have to leave. And that's fine, and I like doing that. But I feel like I'm a real sort of ambassador for the region. I sort of always feel like I've always felt a bit like an ambassador for the Northeast. And I'll always be really proud to do that. Um, the other side of it is not wanting to be pigeonholed, right? So like, you don't want to just be, oh, he's just the guy from Shields who writes about the Northeast. Like, that can be risky too, because it can pigeonhole, it can limit, it can kind of restrict what somebody might be seen as being able to do next.
Mhm.
And I know that we might kind of come on to what I'm thinking about next shortly, but yes. So to bring it back to the kind of campaign, the marketing campaign, Northeast first, get all the events in the Northeast, and then kind of through the spring and the early summer, then kind of drip feed some Northeast events probably through the autumn and into the winter and into next year. But after that, it's the national campaign, because I've always been somebody who wants to go into the London Review bookshop, let's say, and have my book on a table in the front of there, and for anybody who happens to walk into the LRB to go, oh, like, what's this? Oh my God, like, that looks good. And like, doesn't matter whether they're from London, whether they're like an exiled Geordie, whether they're, just on holiday in London, that they might pick my book up in London or in the Southwest, right? I'm thinking of Sherlock and Pages.
Hmm.
Yeah, like that bookshop there, like, and the whole kind of new nature writing, the whole angle that they're going with that shop. Like, I think my book would sit really nicely in their shop, right? And kind of, yeah, someone in the Southwest might not have the full kind of like nuanced understanding of the Northeast in the way that the three of us do. But there are universal themes there, right? There are themes that kind of speak to anybody, I think. I like to believe there are themes that a browser in the southwest of England or in London or anywhere in the kind of English language speaking world can pick this up and go, yeah, this is going to resonate with me. So, yeah, so first and foremost, it's a Northeast thing, and I'll always come back there and kind of like bang the drum for the Northeast, but I'm ambitious for this nationally and bigger than that as well. So yeah, does that sort of give a sense of where I'm
Yeah,
thinking?
and it's really interesting as well because there's always this sense, and it happens with northern writers and working class writers, is that your work's too narrow and that other people won't be interested. But I mean, I'm reading a book set in Korea at the minute in Japan.
Yeah.
It's like it's
Yeah.
it's such a silly like thing where they go, oh, I know, but who wants to like my novel that I'm working on and short story collection is about Hadrian's Wall and climate change. It's like, well, who wants to read about that? It's like, well, what is anything about them? It's just
Yeah.
because it's about and from the north doesn't mean that it's only people about and from the north. That's the point of literature.
Yeah.
The point of art is it's for everyone and people want to learn things. And I love that idea. I love having that ambition of where you want to see your work as well. Because I think that's something I ask people a lot when I do mentoring is I say, what's the big thing? What and it can be
Yeah.
really, it can be small, and for some people it's gigantic. I said, what is that thing? What would be the absolute dream? Write it down somewhere because it's a really nice thing to have because that keeps you going and it helps like um
Yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah, the northern thing. The other thing I like is that you've still got your accent. I like that. I
Yeah.
don't know. It's really nice because generally when we talk to people, I am the most northern person.
I mean, maybe we can talk, if you don't mind, a little tangent quickly about
I love a
dialect.
tangent.
So you'll know that in the book I use dialect, and
Yeah.
we've got a glossary of Northumbrian dialect terms at the end of the book, and we decided deliberately, by the way, to go Northumbrian rather than kind of Geordie or Mackem or Sundance or any other sort of sub-regional things because we didn't want to, I don't want to open that kind of worms, basically. Um, but there's dialect in the book, and I took a conscious decision early on that any editor who disagreed with my use of dialect, I wasn't going to want to work with. Right. This was well before actually sending it to Kim, by the way. This is probably in like early 2021. I was like, if an editor says you're gonna have to dial down the vernacular, I would have been like, well, no, that's a red line. Sorry.
Mhm.
Luckily, though, and I think this is probably speaks to the moment that we're now in and the fact that in the kind of greater north, but also like in, like the Midlands as well, and in the Southwest and kind of everywhere, really, people have realized that stories can be authentically told in the authentic voice that that person or that character has. And they don't have to dial down the fact that they're from South Shields or that they're from the West End of Glasgow or that they're from Cardiff or whatever. They can use that rich, like that just that kind of like magical sound sense of language as a dialect and vernacular thing. So the book, it's not a heavily dialect written book, right? I mean, I think it's quite light touch personally, but I'll insert the odd na and there'll be the odd oot and there'll be the odd gan and that sort of stuff because that's kind of how I talk, right? Like if I'm walking around about the place, probably less so in Shropshire because it's probably going to alienate a lot of people, but particularly with people who I feel a kindred spirit to, Scousers, right? Very working class cities like Liverpool. Um, the odd na will come out. Aye, the odd I, you'll just slip in there. And
Mhm.
it's just one of them things, you just do it, don't you? But then you also know that you've got different registers and you have to sort of pitch your voice in different ways to different audiences.
Yeah.
And that's probably a quite a complex um thing of having worked in academia, having worked in, having worked in bars, having worked in bookshops, having kind of like traveled a little bit and kind of like having the life experiences I've had. Yeah, I like to think I still have a strongly recognizable Northeast accent, but is there anything such as purity now? And we're really on a tangent here now anyway. But I think it's thinking about like who I am, and I realized that I wanted to have those two kind of registers in the book. So I'm really glad that we've got the Geordieisms in there.
It's just getting that balance, but we do have those different voices, and I know fine well that depending on who I'm talking to, my accent changes, and my accent is not Mackem anymore, but every now and again someone will go, "Are you from Sunderland?" I'm like, "No, Penshire in the middle." And they go, "Oh," and if you can spot it, you can spot it, but it's really, yeah, I could talk about this 5 hours. Working in publishing, generally I don't hear people with my voice. So the more people that are represented who just speak like where they're from, I think is great.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So,
Yeah.
Jay, I think we should probably end on a couple of points, really. I mean, firstly, I want to ask you what is next?
Yeah.
I mean, now that this book is just about to be out in the world, you'll have been working on something else in the meantime. So, what's coming next?
Yeah, very slowly. Sort of two projects that gosh, like really, really early stuff. So what I've been doing is sort of trying to write about where I now live. So I'm in the Welsh Marches, North Shropshire. So I'm like a mile from the Welsh border. And I've been traveling here for 16 or 17 years, right? So it's not a new, in that sense, it's not a new place. It's somewhere that I'm already very familiar with. But I'm not from here. So I'm interested in sort of where I find myself now and the terrain that I find myself in and the sort of shifting kind of mental state that comes with being in a sort of old new geographic place. A place that's a border, a place that is kind of much more rural, it's much more hilly, it's much more kind of, yeah, the whole demographic is just very, very different to sort of urban Tyneside where I grew up. So I'm starting to do like little sketches, kind of like almost like little prose poem vignette things that are kind of they're kind of loosely modeled on this idea of exploring the village that I now live in and then kind of working out from the village to the sort of peripheries of the town of Oswestry, and then that being this town which is kind of enveloped in the English part, but like on three sides is surrounded by Wales. And that idea of kind of like what the border might mean and kind of this idea of crossing over thresholds and kind of that being the outsider looking in, but then also being the insider looking back out. The fact that I go to Liverpool in work a few days a week, so I kind of leave this rural, hilly environment to travel up to Liverpool, which again has its own sort of like history and kind of musicality and geography. So I'm interested in sort of that, and I'm beginning to sketch out some very early, very preliminary things. And if you don't mind, quickly, I'm going to mention another project that I've also only written a very small amount of, but it's a fiction project. And I was really glad to hear you say, Sarah, that you're from Penshire, because I'm interested in the Lambton Worm and
Oh, I could recite it for you right now.
what the
I know it off by heart.
I sing it to the kids and they're just like, what are you on about, Dad? Yeah, and I've got this idea for a novel, which is sort of set in that landscape and is kind of interrogating that idea of folklore and kind of why we tell certain stories and what stories are handed down and how they might be sort of tapping into certain zeitgeists and kind of thinking about things like big questions like masculinity and big questions about like what these men who a generation or two earlier would have had kind of if they were building a ship on the River Wear, right? Like what has been lost from that and then what remains in the communities now. And I've got this very, very, very loose idea for a novel, but it's very early doors stuff. And I know that I will want to at some point kind of put the foot on the accelerator and work at it more. But I've also got tons of other stuff in my day job and kind of questions of like, how can I fit this around two small kids and all the kind of mess of life as well.
I guess it's the mess that makes it in a way as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you learned something new like we always do.
Follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our Substack to be the first to hear more.
And you can find us in all the places you usually find your podcasts.
Until next time, keep reading.